If you walked through London 500 years ago, you probably wouldn't last a day. The streets were filthy, the air smelled terrible, and the River Thames was basically an open sewer. But this chaotic city was also becoming one of the most powerful places in Europe. Kings ruled here, plots were planned here, and the future of England was shaped in these narrow, crowded streets. So what did London really look like 500 years ago? Let's step back to the year 1525. London was much smaller. Today, London is one of the biggest cities on Earth, but 500 years ago, it was tiny. The entire city had around 50,000 to 60,000 people. For comparison, today, London has almost 9 million. Back then, the real city was mostly packed inside the old Roman walls built over 1,000 years earlier. The famous Tower of London already stood on the eastern side of the city, and the bridge that connected everything was London Bridge. But this wasn't the London Bridge you imagine today. This one had houses, shops, and even small businesses built on top of it. Yes, people literally lived on the bridge. The streets were dirty, very dirty. Now imagine walking through London in 1525. The streets were narrow, often muddy, and full of animals, horses, pigs, chickens. But the biggest problem was waste. People threw garbage directly into the street, food scraps, animal remains, and sometimes human waste. There was no proper sewage system, so when it rained, everything washed down toward the River Thames, which means the river became the city's main garbage dump. And unfortunately, it was also where people got their drinking water. You can imagine how that went. The smell of medieval London. If time travel were possible, the first thing you'd notice wouldn't be the buildings. It would be the smell. Tanneries processed animal skins. Butchers worked in open markets. Fish was sold in the streets. And waste piled up everywhere. Some records from the time describe the smell of London as almost unbearable in summer. To make things worse, many industries that smelled terrible were located right inside the city, including leather processing and slaughterhouses. Basically, London was busy, loud, and very smelly. Houses were made of wood. Most houses in London looked very different from modern buildings. They were built using timber frames and plaster. Many leaned slightly forward over the street. This created the famous overhanging buildings you see in medieval illustrations. But these houses had a serious problem: fire. Because the city was built mostly from wood, fires were extremely dangerous, and this would eventually lead to one of the biggest disasters in London's history, the Great Fire of London. But that catastrophe was still more than a century away. In 1525, London was basically a giant wooden maze. The markets were the heart of the city. Despite the dirt and chaos, London was incredibly alive. Markets filled the streets. One of the most famous was Cheapside. This was the commercial heart of the city. You could buy bread, fish, spices, cloth, tools, even exotic goods from faraway lands. Merchants from across Europe came here to trade, because London was becoming one of the most important economic centres in England. The king ruled nearby. At this time, England was ruled by one of its most famous kings, Henry VIII. Yes, the king with 6 wives. His palace wasn't far from the city centre. The royal court often stayed at Palace of Westminster. This meant that London wasn't just a busy trading city, it was also the centre of political power. Royal decisions made here would shape the future of the entire country, including one massive change that was about to happen: the break from the Catholic Church. Life was loud and crowded. Even though London was small compared to today, it felt incredibly crowded. Most people lived in tiny homes. Many families shared just a few rooms. Apprentices worked for craftsmen. Merchants shouted in the streets. Blacksmiths hammered metal all day. And church bells rang constantly. The city was full of noise and movement, but also opportunity. People came from all over England, hoping to build a better life here. Crime and danger. London wasn't exactly safe. Pickpockets operated in busy markets. Thieves hid in dark alleyways. And punishments were harsh. Public executions were sometimes held near the Tower Hill. Crowds gathered to watch. Because in Tudor England, justice was often very public and very brutal. the taverns of Tudor London. After a long day in the noisy and crowded streets of London, many people looked for refuge somewhere else in the city. The taverns. In the 16th century, London was filled with small taverns where people gathered to drink, eat, and talk. The most popular drink wasn't wine, and it certainly wasn't water. It was beer. In fact, many people drank beer every day because the city's water was not always safe to drink. Inside the taverns you could find merchants, craftsmen, travelers, and even sailors arriving from distant ports. Deals were made here, news was shared, and sometimes trouble started. Because in a city as busy and chaotic as London, taverns were much more than places to drink. They were the social heart of the city. Disease and epidemics. In Tudor London, disease was everywhere. The city was crowded. Houses were packed tightly together, and the streets were often filled with waste. Clean water was difficult to find. This made illness spread quickly through the city. One of the most feared diseases was the plague. When outbreaks began, red crosses were painted on infected houses, and the words, "Lord have mercy upon us," were written on the doors. Entire families were locked inside to stop the disease from spreading. Many people tried to flee the city, but for most Londoners, there was nowhere to go. Epidemics returned again and again, and for centuries, disease was simply a part of life in London. What did people eat? Food in Tudor London was simple and often repetitive. For most people, bread was the center of every meal, but it wasn't the soft white bread we know today. Instead, it was dark, dense loaves made from rye or barley. Bread was so important that thick slices called trenchers were sometimes used as plates. After the meal, that soaked bread was often given to the poor. Another daily drink was beer, and not just for taste. The city's water was often unsafe to drink. So many Londoners drank small beer, a very weak ale with little alcohol. Even children drank it. Fish was also extremely common, especially salted fish like herring or cod. Salt allowed food to be preserved in a time without refrigeration. Fresh meat did exist, of course, but it was expensive. So for many families, meals were simple: bread, beer, and salted fish. It wasn't exactly a royal feast, but for most Londoners, that was everyday life. London's population was growing fast. At the beginning of the 16th century, London was still a relatively small city. Its population was around 50,000 people, but that number wouldn't stay small for long. Over the following centuries, London began to grow rapidly. More and more people arrived from the countryside. Some were looking for work. Others hoped to find opportunity in the city's markets and workshops. Merchants, craftsmen, apprentices, and laborers arrived in large numbers. New houses were built wherever there was space. The streets became more crowded, the markets louder, and the city began expanding beyond its old medieval walls. Within just a few generations, London's population would reach 200,000 people, making it one of the largest and most important cities in Europe. London was no longer just a medieval town. It was becoming one of Europe's great cities. The sound of London. London was not only crowded and dirty, it was also incredibly loud. One of the most constant sounds in the city came from the churches. Bells rang throughout the day. They marked the hours. They called people to prayer. They announced weddings, funerals, and important events. In a city without watches or clocks in most homes, church bells were the way people measured time, but they also warned the city of danger. If a fire started or trouble broke out, the bells would ring loudly across the rooftops. And in a crowded wooden city like Tudor London, those bells could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Apprentices in Tudor London. Many young people in Tudor London did not live with their families. Instead, they became apprentices. Teenagers were often sent to the city to learn a trade: blacksmithing, carpentry, tailoring, or working in shops and markets. But being an apprentice was not easy. Most apprentices lived inside their master's house or workshop. They worked long hours every day, and their lives were strictly controlled. They could not marry. They needed permission to leave the house, and breaking the rules could mean punishment. Still, for many young people from the countryside, becoming an apprentice in London was a chance for a better future. The London you see today. If you walk through London today, it is hard to imagine what the city once looked like. The streets are wide, the buildings are tall, and millions of people move through the city every single day. But 500 years ago, London was a completely different place. A crowded medieval city of narrow streets, wooden houses, smoke-filled air, and constant noise. Most of the London we saw in this video has completely disappeared. Fires, rebuilding, and centuries of change transformed the city. Especially after the Great Fire of 1666, which destroyed much of the old medieval London. Today, only small fragments of that world remain. A few ancient streets, some surviving buildings, and the outline of the old city itself. Because every modern city has layers, and London is one of the oldest. The London we see today is not just a city, it is the result of centuries of history. From a small medieval town to one of the great capitals of the world. And beneath its streets, the old city is still there. If you enjoyed exploring what London was really like 500 years ago, I hope you enjoyed this journey through the past. This video is part of a series on the channel where we explore what places around the world looked like centuries ago. So if you enjoy discovering how cities and places have changed through history, feel free to subscribe and join the journey. Because here, we explore the world, from then to now.